When you think of flying fairies, does your mind's eye conjure a Tinkerbell type fairy? If it does, I am about to blow your mind. I hope that the true stories of sightings and encounters with flying fairies in this video will open up a new perception of what these fairies are and the myriad of appearances that they can take. G'day, I'm Kitty. Welcome to Fairy Encounters. Flying fairies, perhaps more than any other kind, embody a real sense of freedom, gently lending themselves to the theory that fairies are nature spirits. I've collected a fantastic group of stories for you, both modern and historical, which I really hope you will enjoy. I'll see you on the other side. In Firm Fort in Kerry, there grew a beautiful apple tree, and Mrs. Faley one day picked some of these apples as she was passing. Why she did this, I do not know, as this fort was well known to be a fairy fort. Well, when she was walking home, she saw a group of crows flying all around her. So she threw an apple at them, and one carried it away. The rest continued flying around and around her, so she then threw another, and another, and then all of the apples, and the crows took them all back again to the fort. The crows, they say, were the fairies. I was in my 20s and dating a guy that loved camping and hiking just like I did. We took a trip to visit some of his friends in Kentucky. Now, this couple lived on 150 acres in the middle of the Daniel Boone National Forest. The road, you could call it, to their house was a graded one-lane drive that sort of meandered through these deep woods. As for neighbours, well, they were few and far between. When we got to the house, I felt like I had reached some sort of haven. They lived in a cleared part of the land. The man built log cabins for a living, and he had built theirs. And they lived entirely off-grid with no electricity, just a generator for emergencies, a wood stove and water piped in from a crystal clear creek that flowed from a cave on the property. And that cave was filled with native petroglyphs. The entire area felt magical. The cabin was surrounded by the women's gardens, and they grew all of their own fruit and veg, and there were flowers everywhere. The yard was generous, and cleared areas were filled with lush grass. Now, the edge of the lawn met a tree line, and the creek was right there on the other side of the trees. So we were stretching out from the long drive, and the woman was showing me around her gardens. The bed closest to the edge of the lawn area and to the tree line had all kinds of things planted, and I listened to her speaking about everything she grew and canned, absorbed by her enthusiasm and her sweet Kentucky accent. And as I listened, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a huge insect hovering around my shoulder height. I tried to ignore it, but it persisted, darting away and then coming back to hover again. When I finally turned to look at the bug, I remember gasping out loud. It was a tiny little being hovering right near me. It had short, dark hair and its clothes looked like leaves. They were that green colour. Its wings were flapping incredibly fast, like a hummingbird's. As I stood there with my mouth open in shock, I thought I must be seeing things. And by the way, I was completely sober when this happened. So I turned to look at my host, and she saw my face and asked, "Did you see one of our fairies?" "Well, we'll be able to see the lights tonight." And sure enough, as we sat on the porch that evening, the far lawn had these lights that would show up in the grass, then rise into the air and then come back down to the grass. Not fireflies, they were unlike anything I'd ever seen. My boyfriend and I camped in a tent outside that night, and when I woke early the next morning, I took a barefoot walk around, looking at all the flowers and wading in the creek. In my wanderings, I found a perfectly formed fairy circle in the grass. Well, I've seen a lot of weird stuff in my life, but that was the most magical experience I've ever had. I am convinced that the couple put so much respect and love into their land that it invited that kind of magical presence. And I believe that fairies are interdimensional, which is why we rarely see them and never find their remains. In the town of Lourdes, there is a fairies' fort, and when you go to it, you can see another one in Anna. The fairies used to be seen flying from one fort to the other, and a lot of ivy and whitethorns grow around both forts. A few years back, around the end of May, I was taking my dog out a little after midnight and I saw something fly past me. It was a beautiful, glowing blue light that was sort of flashing on and off like a firefly, in the same fashion getting brighter and then dimming at about the same rate, in the same gradual, beautiful way. It was invisible to me when it wasn't lit up, also like a firefly in the dark. Although it wasn't completely dark, there were street lights and enough environmental light to see everything around me. And instead of being the size of an insect, this was more the size of a bird. It whooshed past me, flying in an organic, imperfect path, and in a hurried way that made me feel strongly that it was some kind of animal or creature or being. It also seemed intelligent somehow, though I can't logically explain why. I had my eyes on it for about 10 seconds straight, so I know I didn't imagine it or mistake it for something else. It flew right past me and up toward the window, where my light was on, as I had been working by the window that night. This was an exciting and magical moment for me, but I really didn't know what to think of it, and pretty much just went about my night and my life. But a few nights later, my boyfriend came to stay over, and in the middle of the night, I got up to use the bathroom, and from the bathroom window in the dark, I could see a huge, tall tree in the distance. We were on the second floor at that time, and this tree seemed to be full of glowing blue lights that were flashing on and off in that same firefly pattern. But these were bigger than fireflies. They were blue with a slight green hue mixed in. I called my boyfriend to the window to look, and we stood watching together. We watched for quite a while until we couldn't stay awake anymore, and we were both seeing it, and we were both in awe and disbelief. This tree was far away, and I very much doubt that anything as small as a firefly would have been so visible or so bright or so big in our field of vision at that distance. They seemed to be lighting up in these synchronized patterns, not all at once, but as if in a chain of communication. It would go completely dark at times, and then we would see one again, then two, then three, then 10. There were some flying in the air too. They weren't all in the tree. I never saw these again in that spring, summer, or since. My partner is a mixed ethnicity of Irish and Native American, and is knowledgeable and in touch with both of his family's cultures. This happened when he was 15 years old, so about 12 years ago, and he was out riding his bike to a friend's place on a beautiful sunny day. From his left, he saw what he at first thought was a very large butterfly flying towards him. This flying creature kept up with him at his biking pace and then flew in front of his face. It hovered there and made eye contact with him. That's when he realized he was looking into the eyes of what looked like a tiny human with beautiful wings. He said it had slender arms and legs, a thin torso, clothed in a type of fabric, and a small human face with a noticeably tiny pointed nose, and it seemed to be female. Well, after holding his gaze for a few seconds longer, it just flew away. He said it was a totally cool experience because it left him feeling really happy and good for the rest of that day. I always loved the idea of fairies as a kid, but I never saw any. I wonder if my partner did because he is part Irish and so familiar with Irish folklore. Many old neighbours near our place saw the fairy hunt. One day, a man named John Dunbar was in a field near his house when all at once he saw a great number of horses and little men dressed in red flying down the field. He didn't know what it was, so he ran home and told his people. They told him it was the fairy hunt. He says that ever since, the fairy hunt goes through the yard regularly at 1 o'clock most days. And you know, his sisters saw it too. They saw it passing down the field not so long ago. On the left side of the road between Emley and Knocklong, there dwelt about 45 years ago a man named David Quinn. Locally he was known as Daw Quinn. Although he was a man well advanced in years, he was still full of boyish spirit, and he always had in hand any local pranks which were then very common. One night at midnight, Daw rode his best horse over to the fairy fort and waited there Shortly, the whole fairy hunt appeared on the scene, resplendent in beautiful outfits and riding fine chargers. They welcomed Dor, and he, not one bit afraid, spoke up boldly. They told him the route they were taking and that he could accompany them under one condition, and that was to keep dead silence throughout the hunt. Well, Dor agreed, and they set off at a flying gallop to the sound of horns and bugles. They went flying through the bright moonlight night for hours, taking hedges, ditches, fences, and streams in their strides. At last, they came to a very wide stream, and Dor's heart sank. He thought his steed would balk at the jump, but no, with surprised speed and effort, his horse cleared the wide stream. But Dor, no longer able to contain himself, forgot his promise to the good people and shouted, "My fine horse!" Immediately, fairies, horses and all faded from Dor's sight, and he suddenly found himself sitting on a plough in the county Kilkenny. It took him a week's walking to get back home. One evening, long ago in harvest time, a strange thing was seen coming flying through the air by many people. It looked like a strange sort of train and was loaded with light, white people. There was an old fort in our village where fairies used to often be seen and heard dancing and singing, and there is a lake nearby this fort. Well, when this strange train came to the lake, it dropped all at once, low above the lake, and sending steam up in the air. After a while, it moved from the lake over to the fort and dropped completely into the fort, and it was never seen again. I was watching some documentary where Fae were mentioned, and it made me think of this weird experience I had like 10 or 12 years ago living in Florida. So it was a late morning or early afternoon during the summer, and I was standing on my porch or balcony about 7 feet off the ground, just watering my plants, when I see what I thought was a large wasp flying towards me from the wooded area next to my house. And it's flying towards me fast. In fact, this whole encounter happened pretty quickly. But the closer it got, it started to look more humanish. And what I first thought had been wasps' antennas started to look more like small arms and legs. And it's gold, not yellow, not brown. It was gold. And I also had the impression that it was fleeing from something. I can't really describe its face, other than it had large eyes, because it was looking behind its back most of the time. And again, it all happened so fast. And when I say large, I mean unnaturally large, almost too big for its face. Oddly enough, I can't remember its colour though. Anyway, then it flies into my cheek and kind of bounced off and just kept flying. It looked back again at me for a split second and then past me again as if it were being chased or trying to get away from something. Then it looked forward and flew to the next closest tree, which was maybe 4 feet away. and literally disappeared into the tree. Like I said, it was gold, so I would have seen if it were crawling around on the bark, but it was like it melted into it and it was just gone. I was left just kind of standing there like, what the hell did I just see? With an odd feeling like I wasn't supposed to see it at all. But there was something really strange about that property. Even my partner, who's a pretty big skeptic, remembers that place as being really odd. I had an encounter about 2 years ago, I'd say. I live in a very rural area and my closest neighbour is around a quarter of a mile away from me. Well, I was taking my dog outside and I usually stand on the porch and watch him to make sure he doesn't take off exploring. It was summer and it was dark out, probably around 10 p.m. or later maybe, and a huge glowing thing flew right by my face. Then it happened again, but this time it was like everything was in slow motion and I could see its little body and face. I thought maybe I was going crazy, but I know what I saw. I've always heard that they only let you see them if they want to be seen. Well, my granny has taught me to leave milk and cake out for them since I was young, so I figured maybe that's their way of saying thanks. It was a special moment that I'll always remember, and when I have children, I'll teach them to do the same for the Fae, to let them know that we mean no harm and that we know this was their land first. My family is from the panhandle of Texas, far east of Amarillo. My great-grandfather came from Ireland and brought a lot of that folklore with him. He had a college education in a time when that was not the norm, so he was a very smart man. Well, long story short, he started leaving milk and bread out for the Fae. He was Catholic, and this was apparently something normal for him, and his mother had done the same too. But it got a bit out of hand because the bread would double and the milk would overflow out of the bowl every night. Eventually, he saw some winged creature in the back acreage, which really freaked him out. This thing, he said, had red eyes and was able to telepathically talk to him. Scared the hell out of him. So he had a priest come to bless or cleanse his property, I guess. And after that, he never saw anything weird again. Well, I was sitting on a blanket in a field and it flitted around me for about half a minute, I'd say. Then it flew away. It wasn't a great time in my life then, but I can't say that the encounter scared me in any way. I was pretty numb and shut off, even to myself at that time. It mostly made me curious and sort of got my attention. Anyway, it never even occurred to me that it could have been a fairy. But one day I was talking to this old man I know. He's a Kentucky backwoods old man who knows everything about nature. And I told him about this strangest insect that I'd ever seen. Without hesitation, he said, "Oh, you saw a fairy." I couldn't believe that he believed in such a thing, but he said it without any doubt, so I accepted it without any questions. Whether I believe in fairies or not, what I saw is what people who do believe call fairies. There's a lot to be said for creatures that we know as fairies being nature spirits. They seem to be so deeply ingrained in the natural world, and they can move in between here and there, seemingly at a whim. I hope you'll share your thoughts on this in the comments. I really love reading them. If you enjoyed this video, come on and help me out. Please like the video and check that you're subscribed, because I have some fantastic videos on the way in the coming weeks. So until next time, stay curious. Cheerio!